So thank you very much for joining today. I'm really excited to talk about this amazing case study. So I've helped a client, a young client, to combat adrenal fatigue. And it really goes to show that we are all exposed to stress. All right, so a little bit about me first. Going back there. A little bit about me. My name is Amani. I am a nutritional therapist and functional medicine practitioner, and I studied at the Institute of Health Sciences, and I also did my functional medicine training at the School of Applied Functional Medicine, a brilliant school. I highly recommend it. I have 5 years of clinical practice, and I have a passion for gut health. That's what I specialize in. And this is because rebalancing my gut really helped me to reverse my asthma. I fully reversed my asthma and my candida overgrowth. So let me tell you a little bit about my, own health issues. So growing up, I had asthma. I suffered with asthma for about 12 years. So at the age of 12, I was diagnosed with asthma, and I took tablets for about 12 years. So every single day. And I think at some point, I got really fed up with it, because I was like, there has to be another way. And, no one had ever told me that there was a link between what I was eating and my lifestyle and my asthma symptoms. And I got really tired, and one day I was like, that's it, I'm done. I'm gonna find a solution. And you know what they say, right? Like when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And this is how I came across this beautiful documentary called Crazy Sexy Cancer. And this is a documentary by an actress called Chris Carr. Well, she used to be an actress. She's still alive, by the way. And she was diagnosed with terminal cancer, stage 4 cancer in the intestines when she was in her early 30s. She was an actress. And she was just given a couple of months to live. And then she was like, look, I have nothing to lose. I'm going to try, different things. I'm going to look for alternatives. So she traveled across America and documented her own, journey. And she found nutritional therapy, naturopathic medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, intermittent fasting, juicing, all of that stuff. And now she is in her 50s. She's still alive and thriving, and she obviously has an incredible wellness business. And I was so inspired by her documentary. And this is how I started, like, trying different things. So I kind of did it on my own, to be honest. For 1 full year, I tried different things. I changed my diet. I tried this and that to reverse my asthma, which I managed to do within a year. It probably could have taken less time, but I was doing things on my own. And then later, when I got candida overgrowth, then I decided, because I knew about this other world, which is holistic health, I decided to work with a nutritional therapist. And within a couple of months, my candida overgrowth was fully gone. So I was really inspired by everything that I learned. So this is why I was like, look, I need to do something about this knowledge. And back then I was working in the tech industry. So in Dublin, I was working as an account manager for companies like LinkedIn, Indeed, Oracle, which was great, but I knew that it was not what I was meant to do. So I decided to take the big plunge, and I retrained as a nutritional therapist, and then I quit my corporate job and started my own business. I moved to London to do that. So it's been about 5 years of pure love. Absolutely love working with my clients. I mostly work one-to-one with clients, and I also do corporate wellness workshops to raise awareness about gut health. And I also have a couple of online programs. So this is me. Now, moving on to my beautiful client. All right. So my client is actually, now she's 17 years old, but when I worked with her, when I started working with her, she was 16. That was back in April. And she was struggling with extreme fatigue. She collapsed a few times on holidays, and that's when her father actually reached out to me. So I was already working with her father, and he contacted me, and he was like, look, do you work with teenagers? And interestingly, her mother, and I didn't know it was her mother, contacted me also on LinkedIn a couple of days later, and she was like, do you work with teenagers? I didn't know they were related because they are separated. So I was like, sure, of course, I'm going to help this young lady. So extreme fatigue was one of her main symptoms, and then also brain fog. So she really couldn't focus. She also had low blood pressure on average, like 100/60. And then she was struggling with a lot of stress, and stress can come from different things. So in her case, it was boarding school. She's going to boarding school, which can be extremely stressful. She was working on her exams as well, her GCSE, and then the parents' divorce as well is very stressful for a young girl. And other conditions that she was struggling with, that she's still struggling with because we're still working together, it's her hay fever. And that's putting a lot of stress, of course, on her body. So just with this information, I was already like, okay, so there's a couple of things that we might be dealing with here. So histamine intolerance because of the hay fever, and then also potentially adrenal exhaustion. So the thing is, and these two are connected, because the adrenal glands produce cortisol, which in the short term we all know is a strong anti-inflammatory. And the more histamine is released, the harder it is for the adrenal glands to produce enough cortisol to manage the inflammation, and then the more fatigued you become. So I was just like, okay, so we've got the histamine intolerance situation, the adrenal exhaustion. These might be the main reasons or the contributing factors to her symptoms. All right, so let's talk about her health history. So there's not a lot going on, but again, really, really important information. So she was vaginally born, all good there. And then she also took 3 courses of antibiotics between the age of 5 and 11, mostly for bronchitis. So we all know that, taking antibiotics can compromise the gut microbiome and also increase the likelihood of developing conditions such as hay fever. And taking antibiotics in some cases can actually block or lower the activity of DAO, diamine oxidase, which is the enzyme that breaks down histamine. So I was just like, okay, this is interesting. But then also knowing that she struggled a lot with bronchitis growing up, and also she has hay fever. I was like, okay, so there's definitely some lymphatic congestion going on, in the head and the respiratory tract as well. And she also occasionally takes antihistamines. So yeah, so that's for her health history. Now, moving on to her diet. So what I noticed is that she eats a lot of refined carbohydrates, so particularly for breakfast, because it's convenient. So a lot of muffins and cereals as well. Her diet lacks fiber, protein, and generally greens, so green vegetables. Now, I'm always trying to be as compassionate as possible because, there's loads of circumstances. So she splits her time between her mom, her dad, and her boarding school. So in that case, it's very difficult to control, her diet, right? Another thing that she told me, she has a little bit of a sweet tooth and she loves baking. She loves making brownies. In particular, she loves her brownies. And she does not drink enough water, about 1 liter per day. So I was already thinking, not drinking enough water might be a problem when you're dealing with histamine intolerance or any food sensitivities or any allergies whatsoever, because drinking water can really help to flush out excess histamine from the body and prevent it from building up and triggering symptoms, right? And her mother is a health coach, which is brilliant because we got along so well. But it also means that when my client was with her mom, she was obviously eating more healthily, right? So in terms of her lifestyle, quite a lot of stress going on for her. So obviously parents' divorce can be really, really stressful for an individual, especially a young lady. There's also boarding school. The academic pressure is crazy. Like school today is much more competitive than back in the days 10, 20 years ago. There's also the fact that she's a teenager in today's world, right? She probably grew up with social media. I'm a millennial myself, and I feel so lucky to I think I had my first cell phone when I was 18, and this is a blessing. So today, you know, you've got young children scrolling through Instagram. There's the social media comparison trap and all that stuff. So it's really not easy. And also from looking at her, from talking to her, because I had consultations with her and her mom, you know, she's more introverted. She likes having her own, she likes being in her own bubble. So, you know, this means that she's exposed to a lot of stress. In terms of her main enjoyments, she loves hanging out with her friends, and she loves baking as well, and she loves her makeup. In terms of movement, school activities mainly, and ski holidays, you know, a couple of times per year. All right, so what we did first when we started, so we had a clarity call to kind of understand what was going on and to determine what was the best course of action. And generally, as a practitioner, you know, I love to include some testing, right? For some clients, it's sometimes, you know, straightforward, but for most, I prefer testing. And my all-time favorite, I always start with a blood test. It's my all-time favorite because it really helps to highlight, you know, imbalances or patterns and determine what the best course of action is, right? So in terms of the blood test, it was a little bit of a tricky one because she's only, well, she wasn't, she's still under 18, so she was only 16. So doing an NHS blood test was kind of mission impossible because she looks very healthy. So it was difficult to convince a doctor to do a blood test, and then going private was not an option either. So in those cases, when, you know, doing an NHS blood test is complicated, in most cases, you know, for clients who are over 18, it's not an issue at all. But when there's a problem, an age issue, then I would recommend private companies like Medichecks or Triva. But again, we had the same issue because you need to be 18 to do these tests. So these are like private companies. So you basically like order a blood test kit online, and you have to prick your finger, and then a couple of days later you get your results. But what we did instead, and I was really, really grateful for that, we actually I did a Genova blood test, and it was super comprehensive, and we got a lot of answers. So I'm going to show you some of the information from the blood test results, and then also we did a Metabolomix test, so I'm going to go through that later as well. Right, so with the Genova comprehensive blood test, the first thing that stood out for me was the high potassium. And there are different interpretations, but based on the intake form and the conversation that we had, it appears that there was probably some adrenal exhaustion going on because of the low blood pressure, the extreme fatigue, the histamine intolerance as well. But there were also signs of dehydration. So let me explain, you know, the link between high potassium and adrenal exhaustion. So as we know, short-term stress, you know, increases cortisol, which can act as a diuretic and deplete potassium. So it means that long-term stress tends to increase potassium, and potassium also helps to lower blood pressure because it eases the tension, you know, in the blood vessel walls. So I was like, okay, so again, based on the background information and what we can see here, there definitely might be some adrenal exhaustion going on there. Also with the dehydration, when we look at all the markers there, they're all kind of on the higher side. So potassium is definitely elevated, but even sodium chloride and bicarbonate are kind of on the higher side, and dehydration leads to a reduction in blood volume, right, making the concentration of electrolytes higher in the bloodstream. So obviously, if we wanted a straight yes or no answer when it comes to adrenal exhaustion, I would have definitely recommended the adrenal cortex stress profile from Genova. So it basically assesses, you know, cortisol and DHEA, but in that case, it was pretty obvious. And that's what her mother also was telling me. I suspect adrenal exhaustion. And based on these tests, we're like, okay, this is definitely, you know, a possibility. And then obviously with the dehydration, she also mentioned that she was not drinking enough water, so it was pretty, pretty obvious. Now, moving on to the iron and inflammation profile, and then functional hematology. So as you can see here on the screen, she has, so her iron levels are quite low. Her ferritin levels are quite low as well, still within range, but still on the lower side. And her total iron binding capacity is elevated, and her saturation is really low. So it just means that there's a low amount of iron saturating transferrin, which means that there's plenty of capacity for additional iron binding. So definitely a need for iron there. And the iron deficiency anemia is further confirmed by, if we look here, by the MCH, which is basically, so it's kind of on the lower side, so it's basically like the weight of red blood cells, and then MCHC, which is the concentration of red blood cells, and also low hemoglobin. So it's still within range, but kind of on the lower side, because we know as well that, iron is needed for that. So I was like, okay, so we definitely are dealing with, well, adrenal exhaustion, histamine intolerance, dehydration, and iron deficiency anemia. So the next thing that we did is we did a Metabolomix test, which was really, really interesting, because it showed that, well, the main functional imbalances were oxidative stress and toxic exposure, the main imbalances. I'm going to go through each of them separately. In terms of, and I absolutely love the Metabolomix test because you see straight away what needs to be addressed. And this is why I love testing, by the way, because at least you have kind of, clear guidelines on like what to do next. So in terms of nutrient requirements, we can see that there's definitely a need for antioxidants, B vitamins, particularly B6 and B7, and also minerals, and then also digestive enzymes. So let's look at the organic acids, and yeah, all right, so looking at the organic acids, let's start with the malabsorption and dysbiosis markers. So we can see here that there's definitely suboptimal absorption, which might be one of the reasons she's not, she's lacking some of the B vitamins and the other nutrients that we saw in the previous page. There's also some dysbiosis markers going on, and I generally recommend addressing that, with the diet, but we'll look into that a little bit later. And what is interesting as well is that when we look at yeast and fungal dysbiosis markers, we can see that her citramalic and tartaric acids are quite elevated, and they are metabolized from fungus. And D-arabinitol here is also elevated, and it's a byproduct of Candida. So these byproducts can actually be toxic, on the body, and also cause fatigue and brain fog. As someone who suffered from Candida, I know very well, this feeling of like having brain fog and being tired 24/7. And also Candida can prevent the absorption of nutrients such as B vitamins and irons and other ones. This is why, by the way, I tend to not recommend, iron supplements, straight away without checking, if there's any bacterial or fungal overgrowth. Otherwise, you're just feeding the Candida with iron supplements in this case, right? So looking at the vitamin markers, so the ketoadipic acid, a little bit elevated, glutaric acids, a little bit elevated. This is just telling us that there's definitely a need for B1 and also B2, right? Again, if we look at the nutritional requirement, we saw that there was a lot of B vitamins listed there. So really, really important to know that. And also looking at the biotin markers, we can see that there's here a need for vitamin B7. So in terms of imbalances, we're dealing with suboptimal absorption, probably a bit of dysbiosis going on, yeast and fungal overgrowth, so most likely candida, and there's definitely a need for B1, B2, and B7. Generally, so if, for example, I wanted to investigate further, I would probably recommend doing a stool test from Genova Diagnostics, but these results were pretty, again, straightforward, obvious, and again, based on her health history and her symptoms, I was like, okay, this is definitely something that we need to address, the yeast overgrowth. All right. So moving on into the organic acids, so looking at the cellular energy and mitochondrial markers, not much to to mention here. Everything's looking quite well. And then on the other side, if we look at the neurotransmitter metabolites, so the first one, if we look at the kynurenine markers, we can see that quinolinic acid is quite elevated. And in the kynurenine pathway, tryptophan is converted into various metabolites, such as quinolinic acid. But in this case, it means that tryptophan is used as a substrate to produce quinolinic acid instead of being converted, to serotonin. And this quinolinic acid tends to be quite high, quite elevated when there is stress or inflammation in the body. And it's also a neurotoxin. And very often when levels are high, like this, for example, the main symptom would be low focus, which is definitely something that my client was struggling with. So we've got this, but then what is also really interesting is when we look at the serotonin markers, same dynamic. So we've got 5-hydroxy indole acetic acid, always struggle to say this one, is one of the primary metabolites of serotonin, right? And when this marker is elevated in the urine, it often suggests that, there is a lot of serotonin being turned over and used by the body. So it is then converted into, this 5-hydroxy indole acetic acid, right? So this just means that she's not using tryptophan and serotonin optimally. She's losing it, and these are the byproducts that are actually produced. So this is an indication that there's a need for vitamin B6. So vitamin B6 is needed for the production of, for the conversion of tryptophan into serotonin. So again, back to the nutrient requirements a couple of slides ago, it's really, really important to, as part of the protocol, to include B vitamins such as B6. Now, looking at the toxin and detoxification markers, we can also see that the pyroglutamic acid is quite elevated. And this is usually a sign, that, there's a need for glutathione, that there's low glutathione, because B6 is essential for the production of glutathione. So again, a need for B6. And when pyroglutamic acid is elevated, it usually means that, again, the body is struggling with oxidative stress, and glutathione is being used to protect amino acids from this oxidative damage. So again, we're kind of, to summarize what's going on here, we're looking at altered neurotransmitter metabolism, so tryptophan and serotonin, suboptimal detoxification, so definitely a need for glutathione, and this is indicating, in terms of cofactors, a need for vitamin B6. Right. So another thing that was really, really interesting is, I looked at the amino acids profile, and as you can see here, a lot of essential amino acids and non-essential amino acids are, shifting, to the right. So they're quite elevated. And I remember when we talked about her diet, she was not consuming enough protein, and the protein that she is consuming, she's not utilizing it really well. There's definitely a need for cofactors such as B vitamins and minerals such as magnesium to maximize the utilization. But it gets even more interesting as well, because if we look at the urea cycle markers, so citrulline is quite elevated. So it means that the urea cycle is really busy. There's a lot of activity to process, the excess ammonia, which is a waste product of protein, right? So she's dealing with a lot of ammonia in her system. And also one interesting bit is that Candida, some byproducts of Candida are also ammonia. And ammonia is a neurotoxin, so it can literally lead to symptoms such as brain fog, extreme fatigue. So there's definitely a lot going on there. So as part of the protocol, as mentioned, in the nutrient requirement, we definitely need to include some B vitamins and magnesium to maximize, protein utilization. Right. So in terms of the oxidative damage, so if we look at the lipid peroxides in her urine, this is just another confirmation that she's dealing with oxidative damage, right? So it means that the cell membrane, is a little bit compromised. So there's a lot of oxidative stress around the cell membrane, which is made up of fat, and this can really impact the absorption of nutrients as well. So definitely something to address. So again, just confirming what we've been talking about. Right. Now, so we did look at the elements, so heavy metals, toxic elements, and this is interesting again, because what I could see here, and this is something that I see a lot with, some of my clients, I always ask them to do, this profile there, because unfortunately today most of us are exposed to heavy metals and toxins on a daily basis. So in her case, she was dealing with elevated platinum levels. So when we have heavy metals in our system, so heavy metals tend to generate reactive oxygen species, so more oxidative damage. And in terms of symptoms, it can manifest in the form of allergic reactions. And it can also, so heavy metals also tends to stop or to block the absorption of nutrients into the bloodstream and into the cells as well. So this is really, really important to address. So generally, when it comes to heavy metals, I don't necessarily, as part of the protocol, I include, a specific, and I'm going to show it to you, specific nutrients to remove excess metals, heavy metals. But generally, we are exposed to heavy metals on a daily basis, so it's very difficult to really live a low tox life. But I generally recommend just doing our best. So, for example, it could be as simple as filtering our water, or especially for us women, if we use makeup, making sure that we go for brands that contain less toxins. The household products, same thing. Skincare products, exactly the same thing. So there's quite a lot that we can do without, stressing about it. Again, with this client, there's quite a lot of stress going on. So this is why, taking that into account, I wanted to create a protocol that is manageable, something that is not too, too overwhelming. And again, it's going to be something, because we're still working together, it's going to be something that is probably going to take a couple of months. So it's, we've got different phases of the therapeutic plan. All right. So what we're dealing with, so actually I should have added Genova blood test and the Metabolomix. So we're dealing with adrenal exhaustion, dehydration, histamine intolerance, and iron deficiency anemia. And then also we picked up from the Metabolomix test oxidative stress and toxic exposure. So again, given that she splits her time between her mom, her dad, and her boarding school, I didn't want to make it too overwhelming. So I created a plan that I'm going to show you now here. So in terms of energy, I think it was pretty obvious that she was dealing with, B vitamin deficiencies. So I recommended a methylated B vitamin supplement. And actually her mother, who was also a health coach, already had some B vitamins from Advanced. So personally, I would probably have recommended, and this is what she's going to do next when she finishes her Advanced ones, I would have recommended a liquid B vitamin, much easier. And then when it comes to, heavy metals and digestion and absorption, I actually recommended fulvic minerals with zeolites from this brand, Touchstone Essentials. They are incredible because they have probiotic and prebiotic properties, and also they're full of trace minerals. So they tend to bind to heavy metals. They also relieve oxygen deficiency. They increase cell activity, improve stimulate the production of digestive enzymes. And as we saw, she was also struggling there a little bit. They also improve absorption, inhibit histamine release. They have antifungal properties, which helps a lot with candida. So I really wanted to go for something, that is really comprehensive, so she wouldn't have to take too many supplements. My general rule when it comes to protocols is that I never recommend more than 5 supplements at the same time, especially for a young girl going to boarding school. That could be a lot. So the fulvic minerals and zeolites are just a spray. So it's literally just 1 or 2 sprays per day. So I started obviously with the lowest dose possible, because you never know how someone is gonna react to supplements. Of course, I do a lot of research when it comes to the quality of the supplements, but I always start, my approach is low and slow. So we start with a very low dose and very slowly, we build it up. Right. And I also recommended some liposomal vitamin C to support the adrenal glands. And I went for Zuki, maybe a brand that you guys know. And I went for the sachets because, again, it was going to be much easier as she goes to boarding school. It's very nice. It has a nice flavor. It's easy, and it's liposomal, which also means that the cells are going to recognize these nutrients because they resemble, the cell structure, right? Because, of the fatty layer, etc., etc. So liposomal vitamin C, fulvic minerals, and zeolite B vitamins. In terms of hydration, because this is something that she was also struggling with, I really focused on just drinking water. First of all, getting from 1 liter of water to 1.5 liter of water, and add a pinch of Himalayan salt because of all the minerals. So super important there. And she actually got a water bottle so that she was carrying around everywhere she was going. So it was really easy for her. And also for her histamine intolerance, we went for quercetin and nettle by Design for Health, which is a brilliant brand as well. In terms of digestion and absorption, again, I didn't want to make it too complicated. I recommended just chewing thoroughly. This is something that most people don't do. Probably I could do better as well. So just chewing was going to, is making a big difference already. And then the fulvic minerals, as I said, it's an amazing supplement because it really helps to stimulate the production of digestive enzymes and also improve the absorption of nutrients. And when it comes to her anemia, just given the fact that she was dealing with some fungal and yeast overgrowth, I didn't want to make it too complicated, and also I didn't want to recommend an iron supplement. So I went for iron-rich foods, whenever possible. And it's most likely to happen when she's with her mom or her dad, and not so much when she's in boarding school, even though now she knows exactly which foods to go for to improve her iron levels. Now, in terms of the dietary guidelines, again, it was a little bit of a tricky one given that she is in between mom, dad, and boarding school. But generally, for energy, I recommended stopping with the sugary breakfasts and going for something high in protein, which she was very happy about. Also in terms of her immune support and histamine situation, I recommended avoiding or limiting dairy. Avoiding would be better, but again, given that she goes to boarding school, sometimes it can be a little bit tricky. In terms of antioxidants, low histamine greens, broccoli, kale, rocket, more greens in her diet, which was kind of a must. And then also for her adrenal support, vitamin C rich foods, such as, you know, broccoli, potatoes, and all of these beautiful foods. With regards to her lifestyle, I went for something very simple, just being aware of environmental toxins. So generally like drinking filtered water. So I know it can be tricky. So my all-time favorite, and I'm actually drinking that now, I'm using it now. So it's just a charcoal stick in your water bottle. It's not perfect, but it's great already. So this is something that I recommended for her, which she was very happy about because it was super easy. Also eating organic when possible, but her mother again is a health coach, so she knows how to go about it. And because she likes her makeup, I recommended specific brands which contain, you know, fewer chemicals, and also when it comes to her skincare routine and her, you know, I don't know, body wash and shampoos and all that stuff, to also go for brands that contain fewer chemicals. So as I said, we're still working together. The protocol that she followed was for about 3 months, and I was really, really pleased with the results, because this is what happened 3 months later. She was very, very happy. Her mother actually emailed me and she was like, okay, so we have seen a massive, massive improvement in her general wellness. And she also, you know, finished her GCSE exams. And yeah, so that was the success story, so the email that I received. So I was very happy with that, because the plan was feasible, and that's the most important thing as well. I love doing you know, functional tests and making long lists of recommendations, but at the end of the day, it's what really matters is what the client can do.